Hello, everybody. Welcome to our second episode of my program based in Poland here on Polonica TV. My name is Dr. Michał Krupa, and as you well know, we hosted our first discussion last week, which garnered a lot of your attention and a lot of subs, which we're very thankful for, with the great Colonel Douglas McGregor. Just a reminder to all our viewers, you can help out in supporting our program by supporting us via Zrzutka, which you can see in the description box below. And today we are honored and grateful to host with us Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, former Chief of Staff to Secretary of State Colin Powell. For those of you who read our book, Koniec Polski, ile nam zostało czasu, you know that Colonel Wilkerson features very prominently there. He was very open with sharing his insights on the geopolitical turbulence that's currently taking place. And we are once again very grateful, Colonel, for your input into our book. And hopefully we can expand on some of the topics that we talked about in the book today, as well as some of your insight and all the developments that have taken place since then. So it's great to see you again, Colonel, and once again, thank you for joining us today.
Good to be with you.
Excellent. Colonel, I want to start off with a pretty ominous topic, which was raised this week by none other than President Vladimir Putin. As you well know, at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, which is basically a sort of Eurasian Davos, as some people are calling it right now. During a meeting which he had with journalists from around the world, including one journalist, I believe, from Reuters, he was asked about Russia's nuclear doctrine. And basically what Putin said, and I noticed that his response was fairly measured, but the fact that we're talking about a potential nuclear war in and of itself is fairly scary. But I noticed that his words were very measured. It seemed he was even a bit uncomfortable when he was talking about this issue. But he basically restated what the nuclear doctrine of the Russian Federation is. And a lot of people, I've seen comments in Eastern Europe and in the Western press, are still basically pushing the theme that Vladimir Putin is bluffing, that Vladimir Putin is trying to scare the West into some sort of provocation. So my first question is, you are a consummate insider in the State Department, foreign policy wise. Is Vladimir Putin bluffing in your estimation?
Not at all. In fact, I watched that particular exchange 3 times. Very cleverly, he put the onus on the reporter asking the question, putting words in his mouth about nuclear weapons. Otherwise, he probably wouldn't have said anything at that particular occasion about it. Very astute move, and shows that he's very good at handling the media. It's a dicey situation in many respects because, and let me go back for a moment to a Center for Naval Analyses meeting in 2012 or 2013, where we had Finns and Swiss and Norwegians come over who had been observing Russian exercises at the corps level. Now, they're the only people in the world that have corps-level exercises anymore. And it's sort of like the Louisiana maneuvers that we did before World War II. And one of the remarks that they made to us was that they felt very soon the Russians would incorporate an official doctrine, which came true, they did. Basically something like this: if there's an incursion into the Collective Security Treaty Organization territory, the CSTO, by a power. They didn't name anyone. We don't either when we write these kind of documents. And that power is overwhelmingly equipped with precision-guided munitions. Wow, did they pinpoint it then? We will have a disadvantage, and if they make an incursion that threatens us in a significant way, we will blunt that incursion with tactical nuclear weapons. And that has since become official Russian doctrine. Many people have told me, "Oh, you're full of it. You don't know." Yep, I know Russians, and I have seen a copy of that doctrine, translated, of course, because I don't speak Russian. That's their official doctrine, and it makes some sense if you're a nuclear power with some 5,000 warheads, and you're faced with one who has a similar amount. And a whole lot more technology, especially in space, to warn it if you shoot at it. And about all you have is ground-based radars and such to tell you whether or not that power is shooting at you. And you are in a situation where that power is not listening to you at all. Yesterday, I confirmed that Tony Blinken refuses to take telephone calls from Sergei Lavrov, and he refuses to take telephone calls from Wang Yi, the two most competent diplomats on the face of the earth, in my estimation. And that is what Colin Powell would have said, too, who dealt with both of them. Wang Yi at a lesser level at that time. But that's really, really indicative of the United States posture right now, that our chief diplomats, and I use that term very guardedly with them, Jake Sullivan and Anthony Blinken, will not even take a phone call from Sergei Lavrov or Wang Yi. This is preposterous. So what he's doing is he's outlining, prompted by the reporter, and giving some discomfort in his answer at having to do it, he's outlining what Russian doctrine is. And frankly, as a military professional, were I in Putin's place, more emphatically, were I in Russia's place, I probably would be saying the same thing. Now, let me add, I don't think he has any intent to use nuclear weapons, unless we do present him with an existential situation where it's called for. My great fear in this whole mess that we have largely created in Europe is that we'll be the users of nuclear weapons.
What do you think prompted him at this point to make that statement? Because I know there's a lot of talk about in the last couple of days whereby even Biden confirmed this when he was in Normandy, that we've given them, the Ukrainians, the right to strike immediate targets that are threatening Ukraine, but they're not allowed to strike, the Kremlin and other strategic assets of Russia, as if it's for the Americans to decide what are strategic assets and not for the Russians, which is kind of clownish in and of itself. But I'm getting the impression that, because you said he doesn't want to use nuclear weapons, I got that impression also, but I feel that whatever we might think of Putin on a strategic level, they are being pushed against the wall where they can't say anything else other than what Putin was forced to say to that reporter. I.e., reiterate in such clear terms the potential use of nuclear weapons.
There's some truth to that. And let's just look at the situation from a broad perspective here. I've already said we won't even take Sergei Lavrov's phone calls. We won't even talk to them. We were going to hold a meeting in Switzerland to talk about Ukraine without even inviting the principal antagonists in that country on the other side. Preposterous. And I think Lula summed it up from Brazil when he said, why would I want to go to that meeting? So Putin's been put in a position, again, against a superpower whose power's waning. There's no question about that. But nonetheless, we still possess this monstrous arsenal of nuclear weapons. There are enough nuclear weapons on our submarines alone to destroy the world 3 or 4 times over again. You don't even have to count the bombers and the missiles, the land-based missiles. That's a very, very forbidding prospect to a ruler who is sitting in a country that the people who own those weapons won't even take his phone calls, won't even talk to him. Not only that, those same people, along with their poodle in London, have abrogated every single nuclear weapons treaty that we had throughout the Cold War, including that one that my old boss was very instrumental in helping to achieve, the INF Treaty, which was, he said, and this is a quote from Colin Powell, the treaty controlling the most dangerous weapons in the world. And those are the weapons we're talking about now. And he was very careful to say, unlike when Colin was negotiating the treaty as President Reagan's deputy and national security advisor, they were 20 to 30 megaton weapons. And as Putin pointed out, there's 75 megaton weapons today, and even more than that. These weapons now are capable of doing enormous damage. Think of Chernobyl. Yeah. And we still don't know what the status of some of the places in Belarus are because of that. We're talking about 10, 20, 30, 40 times that. So, yes, he said, if it's existential, and I'm the judge of that, and my Duma and others that I consult, they're the judge of that. But remember, there's not a whole lot of time to judge sometimes. If it's existential, we will use everything at our disposal. I don't blame him at all for saying that, given the circumstances.
It's interesting because in the last couple of days, while there were these discussions going on stateside about whether to allow the Ukrainians to use the ATACMS for strikes inside Russia, a Polish deputy minister of defense during an interview said, well, I'm not quoting directly here, but basically what he said was, the Americans may have their limits, but the weapons that we give to Ukraine, we're not putting any limits on what they can use. Now, obviously, Poland is not giving the Ukrainians long-range, tactical missiles of the sort, like ATACMS, for example, but still, it does reek of sort of irresponsibility for the closest NATO member to Ukraine, or the largest NATO member to Ukraine and to Russia, because we're bordering with Kaliningrad up there, to make such a bold statement. That I was wondering if you could assess that statement of the Polish Deputy Minister of Defense from your perspective.
It's a very dangerous statement to make and a very dangerous conception to create within Zelensky and the Ukrainian military's conception of this battlefield. And I'll give you an example. It doesn't take much of a missile to do what has already been done. And I admire Putin's restraint here. We fired, the Ukrainians, I assume we were probably standing right by the battery because we are half the time they do this, a missile at and hit a Russian early warning radar, which has nothing to do with Ukraine. It can't even surveil Ukraine. It surveils the skies between Russia and the United States and gives them early warning of a missile launch on them. Taking that out is just extremely dangerous. If you have a firearm warning philosophy, doctrine, then, you have a few minutes. Bill Perry would say, our former Secretary of Defense, who wrote the book called Button, and talks about when he was woken at 3 a.m. in the morning by a duty officer at the Pentagon and said the Russians have launched. And before he called the president, he checked around a little bit, called the duty officer back, and the duty officer essentially said, "Oh, Mr. Secretary, I'm so sorry. I apologize. It was a computer glitch. We left an exercise scenario in the computer, and the computer ran it. And we thought it was an actual firing on the United States." Oh, imagine, you've got about 28, 29 minutes to make a decision. Those missiles are inbound. So taking that out was an absurd move. And the kind of remarks made by your Polish minister are the kind of remarks that enable Zelensky and others to feel like they have impunity to do that sort of thing.
Colonel, we keep on hearing, and despite the fact that this war has been going on for over 2 years, and we've heard enough of the history of this war to know the narrative, the background, anyone who has an open mind and has access to the internet basically can read about how this war and when this war started. But it seems that the more we know about the war, the louder we hear, and more often we hear in the Western mainstream media that once again this war was unprovoked. That Putin, woke up one day and decided that, what the hell, just invade Ukraine. Just in short, I know you've covered this ground before, but I think it needs to be restated again because the amount of times I'm hearing this on Polish media really makes my blood boil. This war is not unprovoked, is it?
Not at all. I thought the campaign that I was a part of, unknowingly to a large extent, but that's no excuse for me, to sell the Iraq War in 2003, including meetings in the White House Situation Room with the National Security Advisor, Deputy National Security Advisor. Title of the meeting, How to Sell the War in Iraq. I thought that was the epitome of what we could do with media relations and public policy, public affairs, things like that. Later, I look back on it as a travesty, but we have outdone that with regard to Ukraine. We have told more lies, more fundamental lies, and we have eviscerated our, quote, enemies, unquote, position with those lies, so that what Churchill said about the truth needs a bodyguard of lies, this is a bodyguard of lies around lies around lies. This is incredible. But we've succeeded in the United States, just as we did with Iraq. Even the presentation at the United Nations that Colin Powell gave that I helped him prepare, I checked the polls after that because I thought it was a failure, frankly, sitting on the floor of the UN and listening to him and watching especially the expression on Dominique de Villepin's face, who was much against the war, the French foreign minister at the time. I thought we had failed there, and then I looked at the polls and saw that we had convinced the American people by 10 or 11 or 12% more that the war was just, which was absurd. And we've done that again in spades with regard to Ukraine. We're trying to do it with regard to Gaza right now. We're trying to make the Israelis look like something they aren't, which is murderous bastards. And the campaign works. It works because, I'm sorry to say it, the American people are just not that smart anymore, if they ever were. And the media is owned in our country. It is owned. We had a federal communications chairman and a group, Senator McCain had a lot to do with this, that essentially put our media in the hands of 5 or 6 billionaires. And that's what our media does today. It sings their song and their propaganda. And it's sad, but you're right. This war did have provocation, and the provocation was provided by Europe and by the United States principally.
In all of this, there's a question that keeps on popping up in everyone's head, because on the one hand, we're hearing, even heading to Warsaw this morning, I heard on YouTube as I was listening to my Frank Sinatra records, I heard this commercial in the background that NATO makes Poland safer, it makes economic sense for us. But I'm sort of the opinion that the facade of unity that everybody is talking about in NATO is basically fake news. And there's more and more evidence coming out for this. Colonel, where is NATO heading in the next few years? Where will the alliance be, let's say, in a decade, if not less?
It's going to fall. It's going to fall apart. There's no doubt in my military or my diplomatic or my American citizen mind that it's going to fall apart. Just, first of all, from its own weight. Look at how many countries are there now. The Texas farmer, the California Southern Valley farmer, the rancher in Colorado. You walk up to him, he doesn't pay much attention to the media anymore. You walk up to him or her and you say, do you know we have given Article 5 guarantees to Montenegro, to Albania? First thing he's going to say is, you got a map? Can I see where those countries are? And then he's going to say, well, what's your point? And you're going to say, well, you know, Montenegro is the stolen automobile capital of the world, and Albania is, you name it, trafficking in people, drugs, whatever. They are now members of NATO. Well, how'd they get to be members of NATO? Aren't there some standards? Yes, there are, but we let them slip by the wayside. We have people in NATO now who are untenable in terms of any requirements that might have been in place before we let them in. And we have given them our nuclear umbrella guarantee. That's going to fall apart. There's no way that's going to adhere. Then the second thing is we have some really restive members in NATO. The most powerful land army in NATO is not the German, not the French, not the United States. It's Turkey. Turkey's land army is far more capable than any other land army in NATO. And Erdogan is looking every day as if the BRICS are very attractive. And I don't blame him. And he's in political trouble to a certain extent, too. He's done worse than probably he's ever done before here lately. So he's got to make some moves. His language about Netanyahu being the devil incarnate and that he ought to burn in hell and so forth is language aimed at getting votes back. But getting votes back, too, could be a very dramatic departure from NATO. I wouldn't be surprised at all to see him. Recently, I had a friend call me from Istanbul and told me he had made that remark. And he well may have, and then thought better of it and drawn it back, because he's done that with some of the remarks he's made, the more nasty remarks he's made about Netanyahu. So it's just not going to stay together. It simply isn't going to stay together. And if you look right now at what we used to call the OSCE, I can't even get the acronym out, democracies, liberal democracies that are amongst them, and you look at the leadership and you look at the polls, you'll see that those polls show that most of the leaders in the so-called liberal democracies are in the lowest poll ratings that any leader in their particular country has been in a long time. There are one or two exceptions, but not many. So that means there's going to be a real volte-face, if you will, a real change in leadership across the board in Europe and elsewhere. That leadership is not going to be the poodle of Washington the way the current leadership is, especially Rishi Sunak in the Great Britain. So things are going to change, and Ukraine is going to be part of the instrument of that change. Now, I'm hearing from military officers that I know in Brussels, I'm hearing there are already such squabbles going on under Jens Stoltenberg, whom most people thinks he's a general, thinks he's Charles de Gaulle returned after Macron, who, of course, thinks he's Charles de Gaulle also, and they both aren't. But Stoltenberg sometimes acts like he's got 4 stars on each of his lapels, and Sakura can go to hell because Stoltenberg is doing everything that needs to be done, including elucidating NATO's strategy wherever he goes. So this is not going to last. It simply is not going to last. The military professionals in NATO are already having some discussions about the idiocy and insanity of Ukraine. I'm going to a conference in The Hague in October, and we've invited many of the Brussels-based military professionals to the conference. And a few of them have refused to come, and I understand why. They don't want to come to a conference that bills itself as a peace conference. But some are coming, I think. And I'm going to be anxious to see if there's as much turmoil in their minds, off-site conversations, if you will, as I'm hearing are there now. So NATO is not going to last. And this is a sad thing for me to say. I don't think the transatlantic link is going to last either. And one German general, former member of the Luftwaffe the other day, Harold Krupa, was talking about how if Trump were elected, the United States would probably come home lock, stock, and barrel from Europe. Now, I'm not sure that's the case because Trump says a lot of things that he never really does, and he does a lot of things that he never really said he would do. So if Trump were elected, though, I think you would see another factor for NATO suffering and losing its principal partner over time. And so there's so many things mitigating against it right now. But the major thing is the expansion, the insanity of that expansion, and the inability to hold an alliance together with that many members and an Article 5 agreement. It just makes no sense. I will tell you what George Kennan, right before he died, and what Henry Kissinger and what Brent Scowcroft said to Colin Powell at separate times. They were not together. I don't think they consulted. They said the greatest mistake that they thought the United States had made in the last 20 years, and this was right before Kennan died, was the expansion of NATO. I agree.
Well, it certainly is turning out that way. Something that was to provide for stability and democracy expansion has become, as Professor, I believe, Richard Sakva claims, an instrument of its own demise because every single round of NATO expansion gave justification to another round of NATO expansion, another round of NATO expansion. Colonel, I'd like to thank you for your time today. I hope we will be able to see you soon on our little short meetings where you will be giving us updates, obviously, if your time will allow. For our Polish audience. I think we've covered a lot of ground today, which is important. We'll be looking forward to the geopolitical turbulence going on this side of the Atlantic and on the other side, because you can never expect anything out of the ordinary. Actually, you can expect a lot out of the ordinary on both sides of the Atlantic. Hopefully, a mushroom cloud will not stop us from having another conversation within the next couple of weeks. Once again, thank you for your time, and I hope to see you again on our program.
Thank you for the opportunity. I relish speaking to European audiences because I think there are still some sane people in Europe.
We're all hoping for that, indeed. Thank you very much, Colonel.
Take care.
Take care.